Now that we have Python installed, we're going to start writing some code. Now, to write some code, you need some sort of text editor. There's lots of ones out there. There's some even specifically made for Django, like PyCharm. But really, you don't need anything fancy. I recommend atom.io. This is an open source text editor. It's from the people that make GitHub. I mean, they're part of it. It's an open source thing, so lots of different people contribute. But that's what I'm going to be using in the course. But just have some sort of text editor. And if you'd like this, it's atom.io. So with that, I'm going to open up my Atom editor here. And I just want to create a new file where we can save our code as we're working on it. So this started me with a blank file, so I'm going to do File, Save. And I'm going to go ahead and throw this onto my desktop. And I'm just going to call this the Python refresher.py. Make sure whatever you name your file, it ends in a .py. It doesn't have to be Python refresher. It could be anything, but just make sure it ends in .py. And I'm going to save that to my desktop. Now I'm going to go ahead and give us some space here, get rid of that little side menu, and I'm going to start by teaching you the building block of Python and really any other programming language, variables. These are the things that contain a piece of information. Like if I want to store my age, I'm going to say age is equal to 30, just like that. If I want to say name, to hold my name, I'm going to say name is equal to, and I have to put this in quotes because it's a string, I can say name is equal to Nick. So these are how variables work in Python. You just type out the name and you set it equal to something. You don't have to specify that it's a variable or anything like that. You just create it and set something equal to it. It's very simple, okay? So that's our first concept. We're going to go back to more, but let's say, we just wrote this code. We want to test it out and see if it works. How do you run this in Python? Well, let's go ahead and save our file. I'm going to do a Command S, and then I'm going to open up our terminal again. So with the terminal, we have to get to where our file is. So our file is currently on the desktop, and if you've never worked with a terminal before, it's basically a way to move around to different folders on your computer and run different commands. So typically you're inside of your home directory, which if you want to get to your desktop, it's very simple. You just do CD space capital desktop. And if you hit enter on that, you can see it's moved us now to our desktop. Now this might look a little bit different in your terminal, or if you're on Windows on your command prompt, but it should be the same to be able to move around. And if you want to know how to sort of navigate in here, really I recommend just opening up your File Explorer on Mac. It's called the Finder. But for example, if I go ahead and go to my home directory here, let's go ahead and do the little spaces here. So I'm going to go onto my hard drive, users, Zappy code. You can see this is where I started, was in Zappy code. And just think of the terminal as basically a way to move around inside of your File Explorer. So for example, I'm currently on my desktop. So I'm going to show that, these two are in the same place. If I type out ls and hit enter, ls shows everything inside of the current folder that I'm in. Now, if you're on Windows, you don't do ls, you do dir. That's the one difference in Windows. It's dir instead of ls, but you can go ahead and see what we have. And because it says it's on the desktop and we can see this Python refresher file, we know that we're on the desktop. If I want to move back one folder or directory, as it's called, I do cd space ... and that moves me one back. So you can see now if I do an ls, it lists out all these different things that were here inside of the same directory. If I do cd ... it's going to move me back even one more. You can see now I'm inside of this users folder. And if you were wondering before, why didn't this say the name of my home directory, which is Zappy code? This little squiggly in Linux and Mac OS is basically the short name for your home directory. So anyways, that's just kind of a quick little tutorial about how to use this terminal in case you've never used it before. But now that you got a good grasp on this, I'm going to go to cd, change directory to the squiggly / desktop. Okay. Or if you ever want to, you can just close out of this, open it back up. You'll be in your home directory and you can say cd desktop. And I'm going to do an ls, make sure that the Python refresher is there. Again, on Windows, make sure you do dir instead of ls, dir. But with that, let's now run this Python refresher file. And all we have to do this is type out Python or Python 3, depending on which version your system uses, and then the name of our file, which in this case is the Python refresher. Okay, .py. Make sure you have the .py there. Now, if you go ahead and hit enter on that, you'll notice nothing happens. And you're like, what the heck? I thought this was going to run thing. And in this current situation, no news is good news. Because, for example, if I said age was equal to 30 ABC or something like that, where, if it's a string, you got to have quotes around it. If I save this and then try and go run this, well, I'm going to get an error, and it's going to say, hey, there was an issue at this line here. I don't know how to handle this situation. It's invalid syntax. But if we go ahead and go back to valid code and then run this again, you can see there's no issues. Now, another little terminal trick, if you hit the up arrow, it'll bring back the last command. And if you keep hitting up, it'll show you, what you've done before. But anyways, that's a quick way to save you some time. But let's say we want to, actually output some information to see what's going on. Well, we can use a print. If we do print with open and close parentheses, we could put, for example, a string inside of there and say something like hello. If I save this and then go run this in my terminal, you're going to see that we get hello. And that's, a great way to show a string there. We could also show variables, like if I put age inside of here and save this, and I go ahead and run, boom, it shows what's inside of age, which is 30. Pretty cool stuff, right? Now, one more tip with Python here. When you're creating strings, you can either do the double quotes, or preferably, I kind of like to use single quotes. So we could just say Nick inside of single quotes. That is completely valid code. Oh, come on, I got to learn how to spell my own name here. Okay, so if we go ahead and save this and say I want to print out what's inside of name, okay, and I run this, it shows Nick. So you've got to decide whether you want to use single or double quotes. You can use single or double quotes on different lines. For example, I could say like Matt is a different name here. That's totally fine. The one thing you can't do is you can't start with a single quote and end with a double, or vice versa. You can't start with a double and then end with a single. You've got to be consistent all the way through. Personally, I like to do the single quotes. It just looks a little bit cleaner to me, but that's completely up to you. Okay. Now, one more thing that I'd like to teach you here before we go ahead and wrap this up is that if you want to create a string and then add some variables in there, you can do that with something called an F string. So let me show you, for example, let's say I want to print out, hello, my name is Nick and I am 30 years old. Okay. So let's say I want to print out the sentence. Currently, if I go ahead and run this, it totally does that. But let's say I change the variables here. Let's say I'd change my age to 22 and I change my name to Matt. And I want what's printed out to reflect what's ever inside of these variables. Well, what I can do is turn my regular string into an F string. If I just put a lowercase f on the front of this, so F, and then I have the quotes there, I can replace, for example, Nick with curly brackets, and inside of those curly brackets, I can put name. And if I go ahead and save this and then run this, you can see it says, hello, my name is Matt. It took what was inside of this variable and then printed it out. Let's do the same thing for age here. I'm going to go ahead and replace this with age. Save this and go ahead and run this. Boom. Now it's showing that. So the fancy term for this is string interpolation. I just like calling it putting variables inside of a string, but you can figure out what it is that you want to call that there. All right, that's all I got for you in this lecture.